When I look at osprey conservation, I always look at ospreys as an umbrella species. When we are conserving ospreys, we are conserving a lot of other animal species and habitats along with ospreys.
Hello, my name is Sasha Dench, but I'm better known as the human swan. I'm also the UN's ambassador for the Convention on Migratory Species. This year, the charity I founded, Conservation Without Borders, is launching a new expedition to follow the flight of the osprey, an epic migration of 10,000 kilometres through 14 countries from Europe to West Africa. As a part of this, we're doing a series of podcasts to highlight the global stories and connections this bird makes, to help us see our complex and challenged world through the eyes of this incredible animal. In this episode, I speak to Tim Mackrill, JJ and Dembo of the Osprey Leadership Foundation about how and why they're changing the lives of young conservationists, the challenges they each see for conservation in their countries, and on a flyweight used by millions of birds of different species, why they think efforts to save the osprey are particularly important for conservation efforts into the future. Yeah, Tim, thank you very much for coming on another podcast where we want to talk about the Osprey Leadership Foundation and meet a couple of the conservationists that are now part of it. Would you mind starting off by introducing, I guess, yourself and your osprey background and the conservationists that you're now working with?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, Sasha, it's great to be here today. So I'm Tim Mackrill. So my kind of background with ospreys goes right back to 1997 when I first volunteered on the Osprey Translocation Project at Rutland Water. So that's where I got involved. But since then, I went on to run the Osprey Project at Rutland for 10 years. And then I'm now working with the Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation on various different species reintroduction projects, including with ospreys at Poole Harbour, but also the reintroduction of white-tailed eagles to southern England on the Isle of Wight. So some really exciting work. But alongside that, I've carried on my studies of ospreys because I did a PhD, which I completed a few years ago. And then I also set up a few years ago the Osprey Leadership Foundation, which kind of is loosely related to the ospreys. It's the kind of concept of osprey migration that underpins it. But basically, that's all about helping young people in the early stages of their conservation career to kind of really have a bigger impact. And we've been doing work in the Gambia for a few years now, as well as in the UK. And I'm really pleased that two of the people on this call, Junkung Jadama or JJ, who I first met in 2011 when I took a group out from Rutland Water to see the ospreys on the wintering grounds. And JJ was our bird guide that year. And we, during the course of the trip, got talking about ospreys and conservation and how they can inspire people about nature. And basically started a pilot education program in a few schools, which actually ended up developing into the Osprey Leadership Foundation. So also joined by Dembo Jatta, who is another Gambian conservationist. Dembo is a member of the Evolving Conservation Leaders Scheme, which is one of the Osprey Leadership Foundation programs. And Dembo is doing an internship with us this summer, and currently, as I say, is in the UK. He's studying at the School of Wildlife Management at the African Leadership University in Kigali. But yeah, Dembo, it's brilliant you're here as well.
And was the fact that they are still rare in the UK and Europe compared to other continents, was that also an element of this?
It was, because the story of ospreys in Britain is, I think, a really inspiring story, because they've increased from a single pair in 1954 up at Loch Garton in northern Scotland to over probably 300 pairs today, with pairs in England and Wales. And to a large part, that's down to, some really proactive conservation, whether that be artificial nest building, whether that be translocations. And I feel like that's a really good just a great ethos for conservation. You know, some of these species that have been lost, there is the ability to restore them through proactive measures, and I think that's another reason why it's such a great story.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also a useful thing for us to remember that along this flyway, the reason they became so rare, we often kind of think and talk about it in the UK. We talk about, you know, what could be going wrong along the flyway, but actually what went wrong in the past was largely at our end of the flyway.
It was, and it's important to remember that. And to be honest, you know, we still do have issues with raptor persecution in Britain,
yeah,
as you know. So, you know, although things have got a lot better, there's still a long way to go. But the story of the osprey hopefully gives us, you know, a bit of hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dembo, can I ask how are ospreys viewed by most people in the Gambia?
Yes. So in the Gambia, generally people are very tolerant towards birds, and raptors are one of those species that people like seeing around, although there used to be and still a little bit of hunting, but ospreys are not amongst the species that people ever hunt in the Gambia. People, especially fishermen in local villages, they usually track ospreys to find out places where they can go out for fishing. So there's this sort of relationship between ospreys and people. Generally, people don't know that ospreys migrate, but unlike the UK, ospreys are they can always be seen in most of the places. That is simply because during the migration, all the adult birds will come to the UK, but the young ones would stay year round. So you can almost see ospreys year round in the Gambia, and people don't generally notice that they migrate. So what I found interesting is that if you talk to people about their migration, it becomes really fascinating for them, and this in a way boosts their interest to even conserve and protect ospreys. And I remember asking my friends about the bird, and because it's not a species that is identified locally, we generally call them sea eagles. So I used to think of it as a sea eagle because of the from that experience, and still now when I think of ospreys, I think of those days. This was when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. And all the time I think of my village, every time I think of my childhood growing up, I always think of ospreys as one of those bird species that I can always relate to my home village. And my interest in birds developed when I first met Colin Cross at the Cartoon Bird Observatory, which was in 2009. I used to go down to the observatory to sit on the balcony and count the birds that roost in the area. So there is a disused sand mine in front of his building where there used to be a lot of egrets that roost in that area. That's how I built my interest in birds. And I mean, a few months after I started doing that, we start having a bird club, a birding club in our school. Which was with WAPSA and of course with the Osprey Leadership Foundation, which they were involved with that as well. So that's how I got my interest in birds.
We first, one of the key parts of the story is the way that the ospreys link people along the migration flyway, and I think that's something that really interests me, because we have students in Rutland, say, that are following the ospreys at Rutland Water, and then they follow them on migration because some of the birds are satellite tagged, and I just find that really interesting because the ospreys are flying across countries and continents, and they don't have to face some of the borders and the arbitrary boundaries that we as humans put in place. And I just feel it's a kind of a good an important message to get out that, you know, we are linked by these migrating birds, and, you know, we've all got a lot in common, whereas people tend to focus on some of the differences.
I think we were the first group of students at Kachong to join the program, and Junkun was one of the people who took us out occasionally to go on field trips, and that was a luxury at the time because we don't used to go out on many field trips, especially that has to do with nature. So I find that really interesting, and it has contributed a lot to my interest and my interest in birds. Yeah.
Do you mean throughout the school system there aren't many opportunities for site visits?
Yes, there aren't many opportunities for site visits. In a year, we only have one site visit, which is mostly due to visit museums and other places like that, historical places. But there was no tour that or excursions that we do that is in regards to nature or any of that sort. So it was really handy to have that project in Khartoum at that time, because it has really changed many lives, including mine. So it's really good, and it's
nice.
Still yeah.
Can I go back a tiny bit and ask you, Dembo, what is so special about Gambia and that region for ospreys?
I think the most special thing about the Gambia is the location. It sits right on the East Atlantic Flyway, and most of the birds can, especially ospreys, use that flyway to winter to their wintering grounds. I think one of the things is easy access to food and easy access to also travel back and forth to the same areas. So it's pretty much the location. Even though most of these wintering areas are not protected, ospreys don't face many disturbance or killings from people. So I think those are some of the reasons why ospreys prefer to winter around the Gambia and in Senegal.
And are most of them near the coast or inland up the river? Most of Gambia is a river. Where do they spending most of the time in Gambia?
Mostly they spend their times on the coast, on the coastline, and a lot of the sightings are done between around Khartoum and Gunjur particularly. It's really good, and because there are also sand mining areas where these are disused, and some are still active but not very active sand mining areas, where there are tree stumps outside and perching places where these ospreys can flew in from the ocean with their catch to sat on.
And you've mentioned it a few times. Well, you've mentioned the Osprey Leadership Foundation a few times, but was there a specific moment where you realized there was a need for something like the Leadership Foundation?
Yeah, I mean, the idea with the foundation is that we're working at both ends of the flyway. So we've got program based in the UK, but also stuff in the Gambia. And I think what really made me aware of it is by meeting JJ and him telling me about the lack of opportunities that young people like Dembo had when they were at school, because a lot of the schools in rural areas are very under-resourced and they don't have the capacity to go out on field trips, just like Dembo's mentioned. And at the end of the day, there's nothing more inspiring in terms of, you know, getting to know nature than actually going out and experiencing it. So we just felt that in a small way we could provide an opportunity for students to do that, and, you know, to experience nature. So, you know, that was really kind of the moment that we thought it could help. And another of Dembo's friends from Khartoum, Nafi Sarr, who also helps out at the Khartoum Bird Observatory. And I must say, the Khartoum Bird Observatory is brilliant for also giving young people a really great opportunity to learn about birds and you know, hone their skills, which Dembo and Nafi have both done there. Nafi's another student who helped out, who was at Khartoum and went on some of those early field trips. And she, along with Dembo, is now helping JJ with the more recent stuff that we do, and she's now teaching current students about the nature on their doorstep. So it's really pleasing to see how things are developing, and I hope that will continue to be the case. But the support we offer for young people doesn't kind of stop there, because we've also got a program called the Evolving Conservation Leaders, which both Dembo and Nafi are part of. And that's a program for young people in both the Gambia, but also in the UK in the early part of their careers, to really help them to kind of find their voice and, have a bigger impact in the sector. And I always feel that young people should be playing a much more central role in organizations. I feel that often, they've got the enthusiasm, the passion to really drive things forward. And so, another key element of the foundation and the work we're doing is to really try and help them to, realize that anyone can be a leader, anyone can make a difference to nature, regardless of where you are in your career. So even if you're just a volunteer, even if you're at the bottom of an organization, you can have an impact, whether that's in your local community or whether as you develop in your career, you can start to have, a broader kind of national, maybe even international impact. But it's about showing people that, anyone can make a difference for nature. And at the moment, with the both the climate and the biodiversity crisis we're facing, we need people to, be entrepreneurial in their kind of, in the way they approach things and they approach problems. And so it's really kind of helping young people to find their voice and to make change.
And my question then to you, Dembo, and to JJ, if you're there, is, I guess you've mentioned partly what the Osprey Leadership Foundation has brought you, but what are you hoping to do with it? Are you hoping to do something based in the Gambia? Are you hoping to do something more broadly in the region? What are your kind of career aspirations on the back of it?
I'm hoping to focus on creating opportunities for young people, especially those that are not exposed to conservation and other opportunities or careers that are within the conservation field. So I also have, a big interest in the research, the research side of conservation. So I am hoping to also engage in a bit of research, especially in the ornithological sector, because unlike most of the species in Europe and other parts of the world, some African species are relatively understudied. So I still have a huge interest in that as well. So hopefully that's what I'm looking forward to do in the next, 10 or 20 years from now. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Conservation is because of conservation, we have chance of bird watching. So the more we conserve, the more there is chance for other things to do. So Dembo and Nafi are quite good example for students.
Can I put a question back out to each of you then? Thinking about, so you've been looking at thinking about conservation at your ends of the flyway, but thinking about the whole flyway, can you give us each an example of one of the threats to the ospreys that has affected an osprey, and why you think that's an important one to look at?
I think in some places, certainly in Europe, one of the problems that they face in some places is electrocution. So there's one particular osprey from Rutland Water last year that only did a shorter migration. Not all the ospreys migrate out from the UK, migrate to West Africa. Some go to Spain and Portugal. And there was one osprey 2AA from Rutland Water that was actually electrocuted on a power line at a site near Lisbon. And that is a problem for birds across Iberia, that some of these power lines are a really good place for the birds to sit with a fish, but if they're not insulated and they're not protected, then there's a very high risk of electrocution. And Via Franca's Jazeera, which is where that bird died, that there's subsequently been some work to protect some of those poles. So very simple measures can be used to mitigate against the risks.
Yeah.
But obviously for a long-lived bird, you say that ospreys can live into, once they've made a few migrations, they can live into their teens or even early 20s. But, in a split second, a bird is killed if it lands in the wrong place. So that is a that's a clear risk in some places.
Yeah, and in Africa, it's mostly that a lot of the sites that are used by the ospreys are not protected, and but there aren't that many major challenges though. Mostly, I think the most significant one would be disturbance, where people would be moving up and about the places where these ospreys use for roosting or where they use for wintering or stopover places. I think that is the biggest challenges, and that highlighted the importance of why we need more intercontinental or different countries coming together and collaborate to put conservation policies and to try and work together to conserve the whole flyway, because it's all good and well if Tim and everyone in the UK who are reintroducing ospreys here are doing and then successful with their project, but it's no good if other countries are not following in on the same footsteps and protecting or creating spaces where these ospreys can winter and migrate or stop over. So it's quite challenging for the ospreys to always change their routes of migration, I believe, because every now and then they would be changing their migrations routes, and this could probably be from disturbance that they have from certain areas. So it will be important to create more spaces where there are protections for ospreys to peacefully overwinter in these areas.
And how confident do you feel about the fact that about taking on some of those challenges? Do you feel like you will have the kind of training and the support to take this on?
Oh yes, definitely. I'm very confident. One, for the fact that a lot of young people, especially within the continent in Africa, are building interest in conservation.
Mm-hmm.
That is,
you really feel the interest is growing, do you?
It is growing heavily, and I believe with that would come with more pressure, and the more pressure we have on the governments and policymakers, certainly the more protected areas and the more conservation projects and initiatives we will have. So in that aspect, I am hopeful. And the biggest challenge would be, so it's quite challenging for most conservation projects, particularly that are African-based, to secure fundings. So fundings are the biggest challenges, especially for young people. So hopefully with time that would change for young Africans who are interested in or coming up with conservation efforts to protect certain species.
And JJ, is JJ there to answer the question about threats?
Yeah, can I comment a little bit on that? Because we have some threats, and maybe for Africa, sometimes we have problem with this fishing net. Because sometimes a fish can be trapped on an old net, and then osprey will be fishing and see the reflection of the fish. Sometimes they can dive on that, and they can be caught by the fishing net. So that's a big threat, but then that can be eradicated by sensitization, by sensitize the local people. So I think it will be very important to do more sensitization. I think what Tim and OLF doing is very good, because going to school and starting with grassroots will really help, because we cannot do it once and for all, but up with the mentality of bird ringing, bird migration, bird tracking. It will really help to save the bird from this hazard. So I think the OLF is really on track. And what Dembo is saying also is very important. Collaboration with the Osprey Flyway zones like other countries, not only Gambia and the UK, but then other countries like Spain and maybe Morocco, to join them and to sensitize people about these birds migrating on their areas, so that they can realize these are birds that are looking for proper shelter. So I think these are all good things that need to be done in the future.
Yeah, it's really about the importance of environmental education and to raise awareness along the flyway. And the point is, and in many ways, Sasha, you're doing it as well through your, your expedition to raise awareness of the journey that not just ospreys are doing, but migratory birds are doing. And the fact that if we want to protect migratory birds, like Dembo says, we have to protect them along the whole flyway. And aside from protecting habitats, then clearly educating local people is absolutely crucial to that conservation work. And that's the point JJ was making.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we had really interesting conversations at a couple of the points we've been to along the route where an organization is doing an incredible job, but they have said that actually they think they could get more support locally or nationally from their governments if we could provide them with something which says actually this site isn't just a group of birders who are really keen on their local birds. This is important internationally. So just by making a film which shows actually these sites are part of a much bigger program, they think it'll also empower them locally with policy change as well as funding, but other resources as well. So yeah, absolutely. And can I ask then as a last question for each of you again, if possible, what would you like to see for the ospreys or for osprey conservation in the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
All right. So I think what I would quite like to see is the change in attitude, and this from like the governmental level to local level, because when I look at osprey conservation, I always look at ospreys as an umbrella species. When we are conserving ospreys, we are conserving a lot of other animal species and habitats along with ospreys. So I would like to see changes. I would like to see ospreys have an impact on the way we do things, some of the conventional ways of doing things that are not sustainable and are impacting our environment generally. That is the biggest impact I'm looking forward to when I think about ospreys and their conservation. But also I would love to see a stable population of ospreys and covering all of their like natural habitats that where they used to occur. Yeah, I think that's what I am looking forward to with osprey conservation.
I think that's a really good point, Dembo, because I mean, one of the comments that people who are, particularly people who are antagonistic about reintroduction, says, what's the point in spending money on a species like the osprey that's got a global distribution, But I think what we've found in Britain and also elsewhere in the Gambia and other places is that they are a brilliant umbrella species, and they, you can really use them to inspire people about nature generally. So, we want to restore them in places like Britain because we as humans are the ones who are responsible for the original declines. But by doing that, we can really, get people really kind of excited about nature. And I was down at Poole Harbour this week with Dembo, and we were out on a boat. And during August, they did 30 boat trips over the course of 2 weeks. This is Birds of Poole Harbour, a local charity. And they had something like 1,600 people go out on those boats to learn about ospreys, also white-tailed eagles that are in the area, but just to hear about birds. But the reason they're there is because they want to see ospreys. But then, you can talk about so many more conservation issues while you're on that boat. And that's why we think that this is a kind of much bigger story than just a single species.
And I think we are sharing the same feeling. To conserve more space for these wonderful birds, not only osprey but other species, as Dembo earlier mentioned. There are a lot of birds that migrate from Europe to Africa. So, but the conservation is a problem in Africa. So we have to put into government to understand conservation. Because if you think about wildlife in the Gambia, the government is just neglecting them. But then, like people growing up with the mentality, they will be the future leader of the country. So when people like us try to conserve certain places, and then those people, the kids come and follow our footsteps, I think we'll have more space for these amazing birds to stay safely and comfortably in Africa.
Thank you. And I think, hearing both of you and obviously speaking to you, Tim, as well, I'm hoping that what you're doing will also help inspire lots of other young people along the flyway. To be honest, we have met quite a few, but I think maybe connecting you all up in the future could create a really powerful force for change. And yeah, made me a bit emotional, this call. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you all for coming on this call.
Thank you, Sasha, and all the best for the rest of the journey. You've got an exciting stage of the journey to come.